The night was winding down, and I was just buzzed enough to know I needed to call a ride. It was around 1 a.m., and the streets were still lively, full of people spilling out of bars, laughing, shouting, stumbling onto sidewalks. I pulled out my phone and ordered a rideshare like I always did. The app showed a silver sedan, license plate ending in 7x2, with a driver named Margaret. A few minutes later, a car matching that description pulled up. The window rolled down, and an older woman with short, graying hair peered out. "You're Jake?" she asked, smiling. Her voice was calm, almost motherly. I nodded, and she unlocked the doors. As soon as I got in, something felt off. The car had a strange smell, like an old air freshener mixed with something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't filthy, but it felt empty. No phone mount, no dashboard decorations, not even a water bottle in the cup holder. Just a completely bare car. I glanced at her phone, expecting to see the app's navigation running, but the screen was black. She hadn't started the ride. Before I could say anything, she looked at me through the rearview mirror and asked, "So, do you live alone?" I hesitated before answering. No, I have roommates," I lied. It was an automatic response, the kind you give when a stranger asks something too personal. She nodded slowly, as if considering my answer. The car was still idling at the curb, and I was starting to feel weird about the whole situation. "You don't seem that drunk," she said suddenly. Her tone was casual, but there was something unnerving about how she said it, like she was disappointed. I let out a forced laugh. "Yeah, I didn't drink much tonight," I said, hoping to shift the conversation. Still, she didn't start driving. The silence stretched on for a few seconds before she finally put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. But instead of following the route on my phone, she turned down a side street, away from the main road. I think it's supposed to take us straight for a few blocks first," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't respond right away. Her hands gripped the wheel tightly, her knuckles pale under the dim streetlights. "I know a better way," she said finally. Her voice was calm, but something about it made my stomach tighten. I glanced at my phone again. The app still showed that my ride hadn't started. My location wasn't being tracked. A cold wave of realization washed over me. If my ride hadn't started on the app, then this car wasn't connected to my account. My real driver had no idea where I was. My friends had no idea where I was. I felt my pulse pick up, my skin prickling with unease. "Hey, can you start the ride on the app?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just so my friends can see I'm on my way." That made her stiffen. Her grip on the wheel tightened, and she pressed her lips together. Then, as if she had just realized something, she let out a small chuckle. "Of course," she said. But instead of reaching for her phone, she turned her head slightly and asked, "So, do your parents still live in town?" I didn't answer right away. My heartbeat was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Something was wrong. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me that this situation was not normal. I glanced at the door handle, subtly checking if it was locked. It wasn't. That was something, at least. She suddenly exhaled through her nose, shaking her head like she was disappointed. "You should be more careful," she muttered. I felt a chill run down my spine. She sounded almost regretful, like she was realizing something about me that changed her mind. Before I could even process what she meant, she slowed the car down. Then, without warning, she pulled over. The car stopped on an empty street. No traffic, no pedestrians, just dark houses and closed storefronts. My pulse was hammering now. I had no idea what she was about to do. "You should get out now," she said, her voice disturbingly neutral. Not angry, not annoyed, just final, like she had already made a decision. I forced myself to nod, keeping my face neutral even though my hands were shaking. "Yeah, okay," I said, reaching for the door handle. My stomach twisted, expecting it to be locked. But it wasn't. The moment I stepped outside, the air felt colder than before. I stood there for a second, trying to process what had just happened. She didn't say anything else. She just sat there, watching me through the open window. I backed away slowly, waiting for her to speed off. But she didn't. The car just idled, the engine humming softly. It felt like she was waiting for something, like she was watching my reaction. Then my phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced down, expecting a text from one of my friends. But my stomach dropped when I saw the caller ID. It was my real rideshare driver. For a second, my brain refused to process it. Then, like a slow, creeping realization, the horror hit me in full. I answered the call, my voice barely steady. "Hello? Hey, this is your driver," a man's voice said. "I just pulled up. Are you nearby?" I turned back toward the car, half expecting it to come speeding after me. but it was still there, just sitting. The woman was still watching me. My mind was racing, trying to fit the pieces together. If my real driver was just arriving now, then who the hell had I just been in the car with? The silver sedan finally started moving. But instead of speeding off, it rolled away slowly, disappearing down the street like nothing had happened. No rush, no panic, like she had just finished a job and was heading home. I stood there, watching, until the car was completely out of sight. I never saw that car again, never got an explanation. And to this day, I still wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't mentioned my friends were tracking me? I stood on the sidewalk, still gripping my phone, my mind refusing to process what had just happened. The street was eerily silent, except for the faint hum of distant traffic. I forced myself to breathe, to move, to act normal, as if my entire body wasn't shaking. "Yeah, I'm here," I finally managed to say to the real driver. My voice sounded weird, too thin, like it wasn't mine. I turned toward the new car that had pulled up just a few feet away. A black sedan. Right make, right license plate, right driver. A man in his 30s who looked just as confused as I felt. He leaned slightly toward the open window. "You okay, man?" he asked, eyeing me. I hesitated. How was I supposed to explain what just happened? That I had gotten into a car with a total stranger who somehow knew my name? That she had asked me questions like she was trying to confirm something about me? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I glanced down the street where the silver sedan had disappeared. Gone. No sign of it, like it had never been there. Finally, I took a deep breath and forced a nod. "Yeah, just a weird night," I muttered. The driver looked at me for another second, then nodded and unlocked the doors. This time, I triple-checked the app before getting in. Right name, right face, right everything. The ride home felt like it took forever. Every turn, every stoplight, I found myself glancing behind us, half expecting to see headlights trailing us. My brain kept replaying the conversation in that car, trying to piece together what had happened. Why did she stop? Why did she let me go? The moment I mentioned my friends tracking me, everything shifted. It was like she had made a decision in real time. But what decision? I stared out the window, gripping my phone like a lifeline. Should I report this? Call the cops? But what would I even say? I got into a car that wasn't mine, and the driver acted weird before letting me go. It sounded insane. I didn't even have proof she was dangerous. But I knew deep down, that if I hadn't mentioned my location being shared, I wouldn't be in this car right now. When I finally got home, my apartment felt different. Colder. Too quiet. I locked the door behind me and double-checked it, then triple-checked. My roommates were already asleep, their doors closed, unaware of how close I had just come to what had almost happened to me. I sat on my bed, staring at the floor, my hands still shaking. I opened the Rideshare app, scrolling back to my request. My real driver's info was there, but there was no record of the other car. No way to track it, no way to prove it had ever existed. I checked my recent calls, the real driver was there. But the woman? Nothing. It was like she had disappeared. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face in the rearview mirror. The way she asked those questions, like she was testing me, like she was figuring out if I was worth the risk. But the worst part? The thing that kept me staring at the ceiling until sunrise? I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the first time she had done this. The next morning, I woke up to a text from one of my friends. "Dude, did you make it home okay?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Yeah, got a weird driver though." That was all I said. I didn't want to explain. Didn't even know how to. But even through text, I could tell they felt it too. Something about last night wasn't normal. I spent the next few days trying to push it out of my head. Work, errands, the usual distractions. But it stayed with me. The feeling of sitting in that car. The way she watched me. The way she let me go. It all felt too deliberate. Too practiced. So I did something I hadn't planned to do. I started searching. I went on local forums, scrolling through any mention of sketchy ride shares, fake drivers, weird encounters. At first, nothing stood out. Just the usual complaints about surge pricing and rude drivers. But then, after hours of digging, I found something. A post buried deep in an old thread. Has anyone ever had an old woman pick them up, but something felt off? My stomach dropped. The post was vague, but the details lined up too well. No app navigation. Strange personal questions. An abrupt decision to let the passenger go. And the creepiest part, the post was from 4 years ago. Different city. Different name. Same description. I kept scrolling, finding more scattered mentions. Never frequent, never enough to draw attention. But always the same pattern. A woman picking people up, making them uncomfortable, letting them go the moment they mention someone knowing their location. And then nothing. No reports, no news stories. Just people posting in random corners of the internet, trying to convince themselves they weren't imagining it. I sat back in my chair, my hands ice cold. If people had been seeing her for years, then what was she really doing? What was she looking for? I thought about the way she had looked at me in the mirror, the way she had sighed before telling me to get out. Had she changed her mind? It's been a year since that night, and I still don't have answers. I don't use rideshares alone anymore. I always double-check the car, the driver, the plates. But no matter how much time passes, one thought keeps me awake some nights. If I hadn't checked my phone, if I hadn't said anything, if I had just sat there, answering her questions, letting her take me wherever she wanted, would I have just been another post buried in an old forum thread?